Yeah, I am betting on tech just getting more and more complex over time, and we're not the only ones. We saw this article, well, more of an opinion piece earlier this week from Stephen Wolfram over at TechCrunch. It was over at TechCrunch. It was a summary of an interview of him. Obviously, Stephen Wolfram, well known as one of the great tech minds of our generation. Wolfram Alpha, Mathematica. His stamp on our tech, his tech legacy is secure. But this guy is now saying, maybe AI is too complicated for us to understand as developers. And if anybody should know, it's Stephen Wolfram. Like, no, like, are there smarter people in tech than Stephen Wolfram? Probably not. So if we've got a guy like this saying, as smart as I am, I don't think I have the training to fully understand how AIs work. So how do these other people get it? I think that's a message worth listening to.
Well, I'm not sure that I buy that he's not smart enough to understand this. I think that he probably is, but I think his point to that should be taken is that we cannot examine AI and its implications across. I think whether you're talking the most macro, like its implications on
Mhm.
society, or even just its implications on your customers and your employees, more pragmatically in the abstract, if by only looking at it from a technology perspective. And we talked a lot about this, about whenever a new AI model is released, what's the first thing they all do? They go run up on these benchmarks, and it's like, well, it's
Mhm.
0.1% faster, or whatever. And it's like, that's well and good for what it is, but his point is that we're entering this domain where we need to start looking at it differently and applying this philosophically based critical thinking layer to it. Now, I took umbrage with the article a little bit, not
Mhm.
because I disagreed with it, but because I actually feel like when it comes to technology, this has always been the problem and has always been the case. I feel like we've had so many issues historically. Most of the issues, in fact, that have plagued IT organizations can be rooted, traced back to the fact that we look at technology as if it's technology, as opposed to looking at technology as if it's a tool to enable some outcome in the business that we're trying to achieve. And that requires a set of critical thinking skills that changes the way you look at it. And I would argue that AI is in fact no different. The stakes may be bigger and the scope may be broader, but I think it's the same aspect. I've been literally for a decade talking about, if you're working in IT, the skills you need more than anything else, you can learn the technical skills. You need the business understanding, you need the critical thinking skills, you need, I've been a huge fan of design thinking, of this
Mhm.
perspective change. And I look at systems thinking, of looking at the overall impact of everything. These fundamental skills, which are about taking that step back, and maybe not philosophical in the true sense that he's talking about philosophy, but not looking at technology strictly through a technical lens, I think is something we need across the board. And I think AI maybe is just elevating that to the point where it's starting to slap people across the face. So I'm glad he's talking about it.
Mhm.
I completely agree with it, but I also think that this is something that is extremely important across every dimension that we talk about.
Yeah, I think one minor difference doesn't really change your perspective or that how right you are. But in the past couple of years, as we've seen generative AI come in, it always speaks to you with a very confident voice, regardless of whether or not it even understands your question or not. And I think that, and it is
It tells you
develop.
how great of a question that it was, right?
Mhm.
That was a
Right.
great question.
And and that's a fundamental approach that all of these generative AIs take. Like, is that philosophically a good idea to have the same amount of confidence, whether you are 100% certain or 0% certain of what the answer should be? Is that really what we're programming for? Whereas I feel like before generative AI, even when we had model based and algorithmically based answers, at least when they were numbers, they were a little bit more binary in nature, which made it a little easier to tell whether it was right or wrong. We started getting fuzzier challenges when we were dealing with things like Google search, which started muddying the waters on how accurate something was. And now we're kind of in the weeds and have to reconsider philosophically what should the outputs be from our computing, How honest and accurate do we want these things to be? And should there be a way for these things to say, yeah, I wasn't quite sure what you said. Here's my best guess, rather than just going forward and confidently saying, yeah, you should put glue in your pizza if you want it to taste better.
And and like I said, I'm not trying to minimize the additional layer that this adds. There's no question that it does. And I mean, I'm subject to it. Like I said, I rely on it all the time, and it's one of the things I love about it, that I can throw sort of all these different pieces that maybe wouldn't have. So I'm looking at as potentially, a move at some point in the future, and been trying to evaluate areas of an area I don't know. So I'm literally able to say, well, this is I like this city, I like that city, I like this neighborhood and that these neighborhoods in the city and those neighborhoods in that city. On this new city, tell me which kind of line up, where this might be aligned. Now, oh, I'm curious. I'm trying to reduce costs and I'm trying to increase my quality of life. Oh, I forgot to tell you that I'm also worried about safety, right? The
Mhm,
fact that it can sort of take all this and digest it, and to your point, it does it in a confident and conversational manner. I have to catch myself going, wait a minute, I need to go check this stuff out. I need to go double check
mhm,
this, because I'm not talking to someone who is truly knowledgeable and truly understand. I mean, the big difference is that these models don't always even understand when it's not sure. It's just spitting out what the model spits out. And so I do think there's this philosophical layer that is necessary to start evaluating what are we doing, why are we doing it, how does it apply? And I think, trying to bring this back from a CIO's perspective, I think he's addressing it industry wise. I think that's important from a pragmatic standpoint. As a CIO, you need to be thinking about it in the same way, but now in the context of how's this going to impact your employees, how's this going to affect your customers, and it had people done that. Some of the early gaps we saw with people rolling out with car dealerships and whatever maybe would have been missed if they had that more philosophical view of asking, is this the right thing to do, and what's the impact of it? So yeah, I agree with it. It's just an interesting thing to I guess for me it was like, shouldn't have this always been the case, right? And that's, I
mhm.
guess, where I was going.
Yeah, and I think from a very practical perspective, it means if you're building a model internally or you're tuning something, you have to figure out, are the questions that I'm asking sufficiently weighted and tested based on data? Do I actually have the right amount of data to be able to ask these questions correctly? And if not, am I going to ask my model to actually tell me, this model just doesn't have that data in it? We did not do that amount of training. Instead of trying to make a guess out of one or two instances or suggestions that might have been in the training data, but might lead to completely wrong answers.
Well, and it's also, I mean, so in my first book, I talked about something called the curse of knowledge, which was
Mhm,
developed by a graduate student at Stanford, and basically the premise is that once you know something, it's hard not to know it, right? And so one of the challenges is that you have a bunch of people in the room that are doing this testing or having these conversations, and they know what was in the model. They helped design it, and so they can't unknow that, and so it's always going to bias their perspective. And so one of the most important things you can do, sort of wherever you are in the spectrum, is to get people into the room that have that different perspective. Intel, for the longest time, I don't, they still do. They had anthropologists on staff, and I loved it because these were people that were not technical in nature. They didn't have a technical background, and they came in and asked just these off the wall questions because they looked at the world in such a different way. And whether that's, you can afford to have people like that on staff, or you just go to your local university and get some of these sorts of folks and get them in the room as you're having these conversations, I think it can just do wildly amazing things in changing how you look at it. And I guess, according to Wolfram, we now should make sure that you have some philosophy majors in the room too.
Revenge of the liberal arts. I love it.
Exactly.
After 25 years of being told being asked why'd you major in liberal arts, finally I can have an answer.
All right.